Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third day of ELT Week Argentina 2025. You already know me. I'm Marcela Villan. I'm Head of English Programs with the British Council in Argentina, and I'm your host for today's sessions. Yesterday, we had another enriching afternoon with very useful tools and strategies. We had two fantastic talks with Eugenia de Loza and Paula Assad. So once again, if you have missed some of the previous sessions, make sure you take the time to watch them here on our YouTube channel for the British Council Argentina. As always, before we start, just a quick reminder that safeguarding is a priority for the British Council. So you're welcome and encouraged to share your comments and questions in the chat, making sure that you maintain a respectful and positive communication, and remembering not to share any personal details or sensitive information. Please note that harmful, violent, or inappropriate comments will not be tolerated, and you can report a concern through the email contact and channels posted in the chat. Now, if you wish to receive a certificate of attendance issued by the British Council, as we know many of you do, you will be asked to complete a short survey at the end of the week. So it will be shared in the chat box at the end of the last session on Friday, and it will also be sent via email to all registered participants. So when you do receive the link and you fill out that survey, please ensure that your name, surname, and email address are correctly spelled so that you can get your certificate. So now for our first session today, it is my pleasure to welcome our colleague from the British Council, Jake Macmillan. Jake is the Future of English Program Manager at the British Council, based in Bogota, Colombia. And his professional career has taken him from the UK to Mexico and Colombia, where he has had roles as a teacher trainer, exam center manager, project manager, and business development director. Before this role, Jake led the British Council's exam work in Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Venezuela, collaborating with stakeholders in schools, universities, governments, and beyond. And he was also project manager for the 2021 New Directions in English Language Assessment Conference in Latin America. So a big warm welcome to Jake.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you for those very kind words. It's very lovely to be here today. And it's lovely to join teachers from all over Argentina, as I'm seeing in the comments in the chat. What a great pleasure to be with you for the next hour or so, 45 minutes, as we delve into our topics around the future of English research and the implications for teachers. So, yes, what a great start to my Wednesday evening. As Maddie mentioned, I'm joining you from Bogota, Colombia, and it's wonderful to be here. I won't give an introduction because kindly that's already been done for me, but it's great to be here on day 3 of ELT Week. And I've loved watching the videos from day 1 and day 2 and seeing the very active comments in the chat, and I would encourage that to keep going. And please stay tuned also for Marcela's fantastic talk after mine around using the Sustainable Development Goals into our classroom, a topic I strongly believe in and absolutely love. But today we're talking about implications for English language teachers on our research. So let's jump straight in. And before I go any further, I want to kind of gauge the temperature here in ELT Week Argentina with a quick opening question that we'll come back to towards the end of this conversation. So my opening question to you, how do you feel about the future of English teaching, learning, and assessment? You could put an A, a B, or a C in the chat here, and we'll have an interesting idea about what Argentina, teachers from across Argentina, are feeling about the future of English. Okay, I'm seeing people quick off the mark. It's very interesting to see a range of answers, but C tending to dominate, welcoming the changes, with a smattering, a handful of A's and B's. interesting. So we've asked this question in audiences across the world, and I'm gonna throw it out there that this is the largest response we've seen towards C, with the welcoming the changes. We're often seeing teachers worried or concerned about how that might look, which is very normal, very understandable. But hopefully, as we go forward, we'll take this on and learn a little bit more. So thank you for being quick off the mark and keen to jump in and answer some of these questions. And I'll have a couple of questions as we go. But it's interesting, teachers will always be necessary as long as we are ready for the changes. Thanks, Marcela, for that comment. And that's hopefully a sneak preview of maybe something we're going to see as my conversation goes a little bit further on. So a quick overview of what we're going to see today. For me, today's conversation is a real representation of not just the work we do at the British Council, but the work we're doing in the future of English, where we're connecting in a global conversation. Teachers from all over Argentina, Jake from the UK, as you can maybe see with his cup of tea, and Jake also sitting in Colombia. So connecting 3 countries just for the moment, as we'll look at an overview of what this research program is, before we dive into some of the findings on teachers and hopefully see a bit more of an active conversation and discussion through your questions as we go on. So again, a reminder, please feel free to comment throughout, ask questions, and we'll pick out a handful of those towards the end and have an open conversation between myself and Mariela. So before we go into the research, I want to invite us to talk a little bit about spam. So you might think this is a bit left field, but bear with me as we go on, bear with me as we continue the conversation. So the image you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, graffiti, punk, buzzword, virtual, these were all accumulated as part of one of my favorite projects the British Council has done. Last year, the British Council celebrated 90 years in existence, and as part of that, selected 90 words that most reflect these 90 years of service. And it made us think how the language is changing year on year, how this language evolves in its uses. Take the example of the word spam. You can see here in this diagram, or this image in the middle, spam sort of came into existence as a word in the 1940s, sparking or peaking initially towards this kind of 1940s, 1950s as a canned meat, a kind of cheap alternative in a post-World War II era for feeding the masses, feeding many people. Then as culture evolved, food needs changed over the next sort of 30 years, it kind of dropped and plateaued at a small area of usage. And then come the early 1990s, 1991 onwards, we saw another peak, a huge boom in the use of the word spam. So how are words changing? This isn't a sudden use or online trend around canned meats. This is thinking about how it started to be used in the internet language. Internet spam, I was spammed, junk email went to my spam folder. So it's interesting as our words change. And I'm sure you can think of many other examples of words that change in context, even words that are changing in context today, linked to slang in your schools, in your cities, in English, in Spanish, in many other languages. But why does this matter? So for me, this example of semantic change or words changing over time is also important because this constant evolution we're seeing in the teaching, learning, and assessment of English. We're seeing how we use English and policies and practice around English changing every day, changing every month, changing every year. And that's necessary. That is fundamental to have these evolutions as we go, which brings us to our project on the future of English. So as we go forward, the British Council is trying to understand what are these key trends that define how the English language is being used. And how will that then affect teaching, learning and assessment policy, both at a school level or institutional level, at a city level, regional level, and at a global level? And then how can we continue having interesting and dynamic research projects to look at that? So an idea of a global scope, but with local relevance. How can this be relevant to teachers in Mendoza, in Rosario, in Bariloche, as they use English in their classrooms? We're working with a range of researchers from different areas, applied linguistics, assessment, futures methodology, to really think about how we can put this into practice and how we can continue to understand that as we go. And this is an ongoing conversation. And we're clear that from the British Council, we don't have all the answers. We have ideas, but together in spaces like the one we have today, we can go constructing new ideas around what the future of English might look like. So this isn't the first time the British Council's thought about the future of English, and I'm sure it won't be the last time. Working with the renowned linguist David Graddle, the British Council had publications in 1997 and 2006 looking at what changes might come about over the coming years. And the most relevant one today is the publication English Next in 2006, where David Graddle put together a series of recommendations or predictions for how he thought the languages were going to, how he thought the English language was going to evolve. Conversations around use of technology, native speakerism, multilingualism, similar conversations to the one we're having today, but David Graddle put down his predictions. This is what I think is going to happen for these reasons. And he said these changes would come over the next 15 years. So fast forward to 2021, and we're in a global pandemic, and this is revisited. And we're really thinking about what comes next from the English language and how can we take English next and look forward. So which brings us to our Future of English program. So I shared a couple of slides ago the aims, and so it's a multi-phase project going over a number of years. Started in 2021, first looking back at these predictions. Did the 14 predictions come true? Yes, no, or partially? And then how can we shape our own predictions or ideas for the future, which saw us in phase 2, working in a series of global policy roundtables. We interviewed 92 policymakers and influencers from 49 countries as part of 14 conversations to understand what's happening in each of these countries. All this with the idea of, at that stage, shaping what we thought would be new predictions going forward for the English language, and then building out into an ongoing research agenda. So I promise you, not all the slides I'm going to be showing today are going to have this much text, but what I wanted to show was really broadly what the Future of English regional roundtables look like. So these 14 roundtables and 92 policymakers, and you can see in the bottom left-hand corner that Argentina was an active member of the Americas Roundtable, feeding in alongside colleagues from Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and the United States of America, all the while looking at how English and the use of English is changing in their countries. So we brought these conversations together, and through that had a series of insights and highlights that formed our way of thinking. However, during these conversations, it quickly became apparent, became clear that actually now wasn't the time to make predictions, even questioning about how useful making predictions would be. Through these conversations, it became clear that actually our findings should serve as the beginning of a conversation, the beginning of a long-term, ongoing conversation, because there are many more questions to be asked and answers. So therefore, what started to come about is a new set of themes and questions that invite conversation. And I'll be really excited to delve into one of these questions today around the role of teachers. But before I do that, you might be wondering, so what did these policymakers and influencers from Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and the United States of America say about the realities of the country, of their countries where they're working in? So you can see down the left-hand side here in the more red, some key themes, and in orange, some of the ideas related to them. So for teachers and teacher educators, it was very apparent that these policymakers and influencers saw great value in the role of teachers, huge value in their role in the classroom and in their institutions. However, questions were raised about, do they have the sufficient support to meet the needs of our students and our teaching context in a pandemic and post-pandemic world? So what might pre-service and in-service training look like to support them? Equality and inclusion was also a clear topic of conversation. When there are notable disparities in the realities of each of the countries, between the urban and rural areas, between public and private education. So what does this mean, and how can we look to close those gaps and provide better access, provision, and resources across the school system? It was also interesting to see the idea of employment as being one of the main drivers for English. Employment feeding in and into why people are learning English as they're looking for jobs in the future. And tourism at that time was one of the most heavily referenced ideas for people are looking to learn English to work and serve in the tourism industry. And I'm sure that's still the case. And I'd also imagine sectors like today, the BPO sector, call centers continue to drive demand for people learning English. And finally, the idea of technology and AI was very present. This was even before the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT, but clearly technology was very much part of the conversation, much like it appears to be a major topic of conversation. But again, as many of us will be familiar with, and conversations that have already been going on in this ELT week, how can we balance the pros and cons of technology as we go forward, and think of it as both an enabler and a disruptor? And it's interesting to see in the chat I'm being corrected or added to that English, not just for employment, but for access to migration and possibly future higher of education opportunities. So thank you everyone for adding that. This is, like I said, an ongoing conversation where we're seeing more of these trends change day by day. So here's an idea of some of the highlights from the Americas region. But as we put together and analyze the conversation in these 14 regional roundtables, we put together 8 thematic questions. So again, we've gone from predictions to questions. So here you can see we've laid out some of these 8 topics, which in themselves are, even a conversation like today, 45 minutes will be just scratching the surface of one of these questions, let alone each and every one of them. But you can see again, topics of technology, employment, public versus private education, multilingualism, English as a medium of education, all very, very interesting topics. And we analyzed that running through each of these topics and through each of these conversations was clear need to consider and advance our work around education policy, ensuring it's fit for purpose, up to date, ready, and reflects the real nature of what our learners need. Number 2 was stakeholders. How are we engaging not just with our closed circles, but the broader community? What do employers need in their future workforce? How do people with English skills reflect the needs of their multilingual societies. And finally, equality, diversity, inclusion being at the core of that. So at the beginning of this presentation, Mariela talked a little bit about the work that we do in safeguarding. And in that broader field, it is how do we recognize the uniqueness of our learners and forge classrooms that provide opportunities for all students to thrive and flourish. So I mentioned today that we're just going to look at one topic. So bear with me today because we're going to look at number 4. How will teachers remain relevant in future English language systems? So later on in the conversation, I'm going to share some links for how you can access all of this resource that's available for free and online, both the research and also a shorter research summary, which is part of this Future of English Global Perspectives book. So I'm not sure if you can see down here, I was looking at my copy of the book, and unfortunately, it's not autographed by one of the authors. I noticed it was autographed by my 4-year-old niece. So thank you very much to my niece for giving me a unique copy of the Future of English as we go forward. But now jumping in, let's roll up our sleeves and think about what most of you today have come to look at in more detail. How will teachers remain relevant in future English language learning systems? So here again, I'm going to gauge the temperature and ask 2 questions, and it would be lovely to see what you might think for each of them. So 2 broad questions. Feel free to answer question 1 or question 2. Question 1, has anything changed in English language teaching since the pandemic? What do we think? And question 2, looking ahead, what do we think the single biggest change to English language learning and teaching will be? Take a moment, have a think about these questions, and please share with us some of the comments so we can have a look. So number 1 was maybe the easy question, wasn't it? We're seeing a lot of yes, we're seeing definitely, certainly, more access, more of a conversation. So, maybe that was a nice, easy one to get the conversation flowing. As it comes into question 2, and we think about these the biggest changes or areas where we might see the biggest changes, I'm seeing quite a variety of answers. Areas around equity of access, some people talking about pedagogy, how we might need to change and evolve our pedagogy or return to previous pedagogies maybe that are more appropriate for this situation. I'll give a moment for a couple more people to answer and share their thoughts, because I'd love to hear from you. Okay, we've got a real nice range there, and it's lovely to see that and to see the realities of where we see changes in many areas. I think all 4 options, technology, equity of access, assessment, and pedagogy, have been referenced just now. So we've got our work cut out, don't we? As teachers, we're always on the lookout for how we can continue to evolve and meet the needs of our students. And it's clear that slight opportunities for change and improvement are available across those areas. And again, ELT Week Argentina is a fantastic example of where we're seeing professional development opportunities around pedagogy, in active learning, in screenless engagement, but we're also seeing about how we include important aspects like the Sustainable Development Goals that maybe work towards more equitable access. And then how we use artificial intelligence, like some of the talks on Monday. So there's so much happening here. So it's very exciting to see. So I'm just going to go back 1 slide and remind us what our question is as we're going in. So how will teachers remain relevant in future English language learning systems? That's our point of a departure. And I remember, and maybe it's still going on in your institutions, at some point, the question wasn't how, the question was will. If we go back to the launch of some of these early AI chatbots, there was great fear across the industry, and I don't doubt that that still exists. Will teachers remain relevant in future English language systems? But I'm here to talk about how will English language teachers remain relevant in the future. I really want to go into that how, because I think, as Mariano puts, teachers will remain relevant. So let's jump into a couple of the headlines that we've seen in our research. Firstly, demand for English continues to be high, both for individuals, in institutions, in countries, and across territories. English is seen as a great opportunity to access new opportunities for migration, education, and even interconnectedness within our globalized societies. And as part of that, one of our key headlines from the research is that English teachers are essential. English teachers are critical to help meet this growing demand from young people and adults to continue learning English. The role of the English teacher and teaching as such has always been central to this. But as it has always been, it is in constant evolution. So we'll continue to see the role of the teacher evolve and change over time. So teaching is both rewarding and challenging. I'm not the first person to say that, and I won't be the last. And though many teachers enter the profession with sincere and positive motives, factors related to working conditions, lack of preparedness, and self-efficacy can actually affect motivation levels. So teachers need support and care through quality initial training or pre-service training and ongoing professional development. So training is key. It's also worth noting that many decisions that directly affect English language teachers are top-down initiatives, from the top to the bottom, although that is changing. However, teachers thrive when they're given the agency to experiment, to develop, and to innovate. And this is more often than not ideas that support our students to flourish. So this agency and this independence to support and try new things to support our students to flourish. And finally, the idea of care. It goes without saying that supportive and inclusive working environments and the provision of opportunities for career progression might and should encourage more teachers to remain in the profession. And that is really something we need. We need retention strategies that support that growth opportunities for our teachers so they stay in the profession and they stay innovating and moving forward. So these are some quick headlines from what we're seeing in some of the research. But again, going back to the core question is, how will teachers remain relevant in future English language learning systems? So a moment ago, I was insistent that they will remain relevant, but how? How do we continue to ensure that in our practices? So all our data tells us that teachers are very much at the heart of the teaching and learning process and across our English learning systems. And so regardless of many of the technological shifts that we've seen in the pandemic and that were referred to in the chat a moment ago, teachers continue to be very, very important. However, in some places of the world, there are concerns about capacity. And we saw that a little bit in that America's roundtable. Two questions are often asked. Are there enough English teachers? And are there enough skilled English teachers? Questions that I'll leave and for us to reflect on and think about as we go. And what it's wonderful to see here It's teachers engaged in their own professional development. So we're seeing teachers who believe they're at the heart of the process, but also recognize that ongoing skills and development and training is key to that. So when it comes to technology that we've mentioned, again, more questions come to mind. Is it a help or a hindrance? Do teachers like technology? Can teachers exploit technology effectively? So it's interesting to see that some countries and institutions are embracing AI, whilst others are looking to avoid it. How can we steer clear of this? Stick to the status quo and continue what we're doing. But it's interesting to think also about these contexts that don't have access to that technology or access to that infrastructure to be able to even consider these questions. So again, 3 different but very interesting camps to consider. And again, it goes back to something we referred to earlier in the conversation, that the incorporation of technology isn't new. Since the 1940s, gramophones have been used for listening exercises. The incorporation of radio and TV in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s for language learning opportunities or learning opportunities and beyond. And then cassette tapes and the first installations of computer laboratories. It's always been a part of our learning experience. So it's a matter of adapting, continuing to evolve that, questioning it where necessary, of course, using discretion, but being open to these changes and thinking about how can I effectively harness or leverage or use these changes to my best skill set and also the needs of my students. And finally, considering these 3 questions, what are the implications of all of this for development and training? And I would say the implications are considerable and have multiple facets to bear in mind at all levels of the education system, whether that's educational policy, institutional policy, or ourselves as individuals. We must continue to take action and consider thinking about what this looks like for pre-service and ongoing training. So these are very big questions, as I said, and we don't claim to have all, if any, of the answers. And spaces like these are working towards finding the answers together with audiences across the world. So thank you for being part of that. Thank you for continuing to agree and disagree with some of the information that I'm sharing. That is the core of what we're looking for in the Future of English program. So here, we're going to look a little bit about some of the factors that we think and our research is telling us might influence the role of the teacher. And if I was in your shoes, maybe you might think, I know what affects me. I know the context of where I'm working. None of this is new, but bear with me and let's see where this takes us. So we've talked about this in a couple of different ways. So policy is clearly one of the major factors that might influence our work as teachers. Decisions about the use and the role of English, the curriculum, national assessments, materials that are used or banned, and how we think about that. Some of these decisions are out of our hands, but they nonetheless have an impact on what happens in our classrooms and our institutions. Next up, the learner. Earlier, or a couple of slides ago, I asked what had changed post-pandemic. And one answer is clearly the learner. Our learners, whether they early years in primary education, secondary education, whether they're adults, whether they're more elderly learners, our learners are changing in different ways, in different contexts. Generally, they're more aware of possibilities and opportunities and ways to complement their learning. And sometimes, hopefully, they're more engaged, although I'm just seeing an idea of reduced attention. So how we see that in different contexts. And this is very interesting, as we'll continue to see that evolve as we see the evolution from different generations of young people entering our classrooms. When it comes to resources, we're seeing a seemingly never-ending stream of new pedagogical resources. This no doubt generates conversation and fear about whether they reinforce and complement the role of the teacher or whether they seek to replace it. And that might change and continues to change as we go. But for me, you, the teachers, have the biggest influence on yourselves and what you do, the biggest influence on what your classroom might look like. Each of us as individuals and then as a teaching collective have that largest influence. So on this slide with our orange, green and blue bubbles, I want to talk about a little bit about the concept of teacher beliefs. And I say this because regardless of all the factors we've seen on the previous slide, regardless of the policies in place or the resources you have or don't have, what you do in the classroom, and equally what you don't do, what you accept, change, reject, comes down to what you believe about teaching and learning and your role within that. Our beliefs about education generally, the teaching and learning process and our own professional development drive our practice and hopefully drive our development. Professional development can be institutional and driven by schools and governments, but it can also be personal, driven by our own interests and desire to know more about a particular aspect of teaching and learning. In the previous slide, I talked about the learner being one of our biggest changes. I wasn't just talking about the students we teach, I was also referring to ourselves as learners, taking ownership of what we want to learn, using our agency to be better informed and improve our classroom practice to help optimize the teaching and learning experience. The three elements on screen, teacher beliefs, classroom practice, and professional development, feed into each other, inform each other, and now more than ever, we should be asking ourselves, what do I believe about teaching and learning English? What is my role within that? And how can I best achieve what I want for both me and my students? So if you ask me what's in store for teachers looking into the future, my answer is teachers taking ownership of the importance that has been placed on them and having the confidence to be the change they want to see. So that's very exciting stuff for me. That ownership, that autonomy, that agency that we seek for our teachers taking control of their own professional development. So what I want to finish on, I'm coming towards the end of my session, and thank you everyone for continuing to hang on and stay in here as we continue this conversation. I want to throw out four possible ideas for continuing to evolve our professional practice, continuing to evolve the way that we work in the classroom. The idea of multilingualism. So for many of us around the world, the days of the English only classroom are gone. We're highly encouraging practices that support the simultaneous or parallel use of multiple languages in the classroom to aid our learning. So this better reflects the outside realities and the realities outside our classroom and our multilingual societies. Artificial intelligence and technology. So there are a number of sessions this week on the topic and ways to harness this in different ways and use technology. So I'm not going to jump into to more detail, too many more details there, but I would emphasize one thing, and one belief that we have strong at the British Council is that learning and learning objectives and our learners must drive how we develop technology rather than technology driving the way that our learning processes look. So very important clarity and differentiation there. When it comes to assessment, once a dirty word in our teachers' rooms and our training process, the role of assessment for learning and assessment of learning is key in supporting the development of our students. So how can we embrace new holistic assessment practices that allow our students to flourish? There's some really interesting stuff out there and work being done by partners across the world. And again, I've seen it throughout the chat. One of these key topics that we keep coming back to is mental health and well-being. So both for our students and our teachers, how can we ensure that we have institutional policies and processes that protect the well-being of our students and teachers? And how can that be ingrained in our policy practice and our daily routines and ways of working? And thank you, Diana, for continuing to emphasize the importance of that well-being, not just for our students, but of our teachers. So it really is an important part of that. So it would be unfair for me to just suggest these topics without saying a little bit more or sharing a little bit more ideas and resources for where to maybe take some activities to either begin or continue your learning journeys here. So in the chat, we're going to share some links to each of the resources that I've mentioned today. But when it comes to multilingualism, I'm really excited to share a whole package of resources that we have on the British Council Teaching English website about different ways to manage the use of multilingual classrooms and how to develop multilingual practices. When it comes to artificial intelligence, in December, the British Council published a very practical set of resources that you can take off the shelf and take into your classrooms for using with your students in school contexts. So plenty of ways to incorporate technology into the classroom. Also, I thought maybe over a lunch break or over a coffee or a tea later this week, you might want to look a little bit more into the world of assessment. So how can we assess more fairly and more effectively? The ideas of what classroom practices might look like. So we're going to share access to a free podcast to look at that. And also, finally, when it comes to well-being and mental health, some articles with practical tips for how to use that. And again, I'll be very clear to mention here, this is just the beginning. These are just some ideas. I'm sure many of the teachers joining us from all over Argentina will have other ideas that they might want to share. And again, in our conversations throughout ELT Week, there's plenty of fantastic resources coming up again and again. So really exciting to see that. So please take advantage of these free resources we're going to share in the chat now. So a final message for me, for some ideas of what we or Jake today would suggest that teachers should continue striving to be. Everyone on this call, I have no doubt, continues in the profession because of their need and because of their skill set around being versatile and agile, how we adapt to the challenges in front of us and how we continue to ensure we have mindsets, growth mindsets that allow us to keep taking on these challenges, but recognize that changes can and will come. We're also striving towards ourselves as teachers being global citizens, taking advantage of English being a connector, and how we can encourage our students to take advantage of connections with classrooms across the world, with students in different countries that can really broaden their horizons and their mindsets. As teachers, we must continue to be resilient. Does that link into a versatility and agility? I would say yes, but there is also that determination and perseverance through our beliefs for what we're trying to do. Inclusivity, again, must be at the core of what we do. How can we ensure every student is included in our processes and ensure that they all have the chances to shine? And finally, a level of curiosity. how do we keep thinking as ourselves and our beliefs to keep changing and growing in everything that we do, and where we need to question policies and practices, we have the strength of mind, determination to question them and to challenge. Whew. So that's almost it for me. That's, for me, what I wanted to finish on with these high points, and what I'm sure many of you already practice in your day-to-day classrooms. I also just want to quickly finish with two final invitations. Way back when, it feels like a lifetime ago, I referenced, we talked about spam and how words are changing, and this the British Council 90 Years and 90 Words project. This first QR code would be an option to see a little bit more about how words are changing in the English language. And the second QR code is a very exciting event we have on Thursday, the 6th of March, with a renowned linguist, David Crystal, who's published over 100 books on the English language. And we'll be talking with David about what is the future of the English language and how is it continue to change. So please take a look or join us for this free event online on Thursday, 6th of March. So just coming to a close, thank you everyone for being part of this conversation. On the screen, we're sharing an option to learn more about our program or sign up for our newsletter. I promise you it's once every 2 months, so it won't fill up your inbox, but with ideas of what's happening in our research work and how we continue to develop resources that are relevant for classrooms, not just across Argentina, but across the Americas, and connect teachers and students wherever they are. So in the chat, we've shared a link to these resources, and I'm sure we'll share it again. But I've seen Mariela's come back on screen. So Mariela, you going to give me a break? Am I going to have a chance to take a drink of water?
Sign us up. No, just kidding. Thank you so much, Jake. It's so very important to have these conversations among teachers. And if I may share something that you mentioned earlier, when we were backstage, Jake came on and said he had been watching the previous ELT Week talks, and that perhaps this wasn't as practical in terms of sharing tips and strategies for the classroom. And we were confident when we included this talk in our program, because it's so important to have these conversations. And we teachers, because we're busy and we're lesson planning and we're correcting and we are getting ready for the start of lessons, we sometimes don't find the time to think about these big topics, to ask ourselves these questions, to have the chance to share with colleagues what our thoughts are on the different topics. So thank you, Jake, for bringing so many questions to the session, and also some answers, or at least some ideas to share with teachers. This is great.
No, it was lots of fun. There's lots of fun. Once you get going, it's kind of hard to stop. And seeing also the energy coming through the chat, and the comments and the questions and the I agree, I disagree. Have you thought about that? Is what this is all about.
Yes, let's tackle some of those questions from the chat. And if you have any others, make sure that you include them. Some people who were here yesterday are tagging their questions with question to make them my life a bit easier. So one of the first questions we had when you were talking about the process of how the research happened, and you were talking about the different sources of information where you collected the different interviews. One of the questions that we have from Samantha Grisolia is, how were the delegates chosen when you had these conversations in the different geographies with policymakers? Who were these policymakers and influencers? How do you pick them?
No, it's a great question.
No,
it wasn't. It was much more of a conversation around what does this look like from public and private policy? What's happening at universities and teacher training centers, and what's that looking like in institutions? In general, I'd say about 2/3 of the participants tend to work in local or national government. So local or national education authorities, but that was also complemented in particular from universities as well. So leads of faculties of education faculties. I would note there that this, as we talked about, and people will be maybe tired of me saying, is just the beginning and was just the beginning in 2023. The conversation continues to evolve through workshops and activities, understanding teacher beliefs. And as we go forward, and this is a sneak preview, what we really want to also hear from is young people. How can the learners and young people, school leavers aged 16 to 22, what are their perceptions about the use, the need of English, and how does that contend with other languages that they may study or speak at home? So yeah, centering the learner, and in particular the younger learner, in that conversation.
Definitely. We have many questions now. Now we have too many questions. Ugo asks, do you think changing the way we assess is still a big challenge? And you touched on this a little bit, and you have a background in assessment. So is the way we assess still a big challenge? And if so, why?
I would say without a doubt. The way we assess continues to be a challenge, and whether that's based on stigma and how people perceive assessment, whether that's also the reality that in many teacher training programs, assessment plays a very small part of those programs, or then the practicalities of what assessment might look like for a classroom. If my classroom has 35, 40 students, to design an assessment that fits their needs and to then grade that is a significant challenge. And what about if we scale that up to national or even just municipal testing, those challenges, which then comes into the needs of localization rather than larger scale testing solutions that might already exist? How do they fit your context or not fit your context? And it's an ongoing conversation that again is exciting to be part of.
Definitely. There were lots of comments on multilingualism as well. And one of the commenters in the chat was asking exactly what is meant by multilingualism. And especially when we think about our classrooms.
So in essence, and I'm sorry that I won't be able to give a citation of a specific number, it is recognizing not just the learner realities of speaking one or more languages, but also the concept of bringing that into our classroom. So recognizing how, I'm going to take a stab and a guess that most people on this call speak both English and Spanish. So how the two languages can complement language learning in your classroom, how we can work together within that, and through sound and prepared pedagogy, ensure that. So looking to how the languages can complement each other and reflect those realities in a changing linguistic landscape. Which I think, if I look back to when I learned Spanish or even French, I remember going into the classroom and the teacher saying, this is French only, Spanish only. Even when I was pre-A1, it was all of that. I now like to think that language classrooms can and will be different.
Thank you. I think that resonates with most of us in terms of our experience as learners. That's a good change. We have two very difficult questions, so I'm going to read both. You can choose one if you're brave. Before we do that, there was another comment that I wanted to go back to when you were asking teachers to rate how they felt about change and everybody welcome to change. And that tells you a little bit about the type of audience that you have here. Nat Parisi said in the chat that in this country we are used to crisis, and that this is perhaps something that has to do with our attitude to change and with resilience building. And I'm sure that in the contexts where you are as well. But the two questions that I wanted to go back to are, Gonzalo asks, what is the future of English in your opinion? That's a very big one, so I'll let you sit with it for a minute. And Mariano mentions, you touched on agency and autonomy, and he states that governmental policies oftentimes clash with this autonomy, forcing teachers to stick to a fixed program, a tight schedule. So what can be done to counter this? So would you like to answer either or both of those?
I mean, I can give personal opinions on both of them. And, you know, if the British Council definitely doesn't have the answer, Jake almost certainly doesn't have all the answers. But much like everyone on this call, I've got my opinions and my theories. So if you're willing to pay my 2 cents and have a little, so what's the future of English? I think it will continue to be very relevant, very, very relevant as we connect societies, connect people. I saw in the chat a moment ago when we talked about not just multilingualism, but multiculturalism. And I would hope it continues to see a world where those cultures and languages are placed on the same level. They're both and all equally as important as one another. I think English will continue to dominate, in particular as a language for employment and higher education. We're seeing university campuses spread across the world. So what might have been a university in one city or one country, take Tec de Monterrey from Mexico, is now all over the region. Take other universities from different countries, they grow, and that English can often be a driver of that, of accessing that. What might happen beyond 2030? Let's see. I mean, it's very hard to predict. I think you mentioned a moment ago the context of Argentina and people's experience dealing with crises. That is reflected every time I open the newspaper today, or open the newspaper, God, that's outdated. Every time I open my app for my news source. So it is very hard to think about what that might look like. And when it comes down to agency and autonomy, this is a key question. I would kind of, to a certain extent, link it back to well-being and encourage teachers to do what makes them feel safe and secure, rather than anything that pushes them out of their comfort zone, but also asking questions. My favorite tactic and strategy, whether that's talking to someone whose opinion I don't believe in or someone that I think might be spreading misinformation, is to ask questions, is to understand why, understand how. And if we have our learners at the center of that, whether that's speaking with our institutional coordinator, our school director, our local education authorities, that insistence on understanding why and how this is benefiting our student processes could be very interesting. Because it's interesting seeing that example that you mentioned in Argentina, or that Mariano mentioned in the chat, of it being very rigid. In Colombia, there is no strict English curriculum. They've got the derechos básicos de aprendizaje and kind of guidelines about what English might look like. But that's also, there is no utopia in a way. We all kind of deal the cards that we're dealt and the context and strive for change, that growth, that resilience. But it's a matter of working with the systems and pushing for systems change that always suits the needs of our teachers.
That's a fantastic attempt at an answer, much better than I thought you would come up with on the fly. So excellent. Thank you so much, Jake. We could stay on for a bit longer, but I'm afraid we have another talk to move on to.
An exciting talk, a very exciting talk.
Everybody to the upcoming Future of English events. And I know Lily has posted the link to the file that you shared with all the links to attend the webinars that are coming up, and to read the publications and to read the research reports, as well as the other resources. So there it is in the chat again. So thank you so much, and I hope we continue talking about the future of English together.
Perfect. I look forward to being invited back in a future time. It would be great to be here. Thank you, Mariela, and thank you everyone for joining today.
Good evening, Jake, and everybody else. Please stick around. We have another fantastic talk today. Jake mentioned it briefly earlier. For our next session, I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Marcela Villan. And I'm sure you know Marcela. She's a global educator and an international speaker with over 30 years of experience in language teaching and nearly 20 years of experience in environmental education, sustainability, global citizenship. She's a passionate advocate for integrating the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into classrooms. She has worked extensively across Latin America and globally. She has been with us in previous talks as well. She collaborates with organizations such as the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network Global Schools Program and the Institute for Humane Education to promote impactful education. So she mentors and empowers educators and students to create positive change through innovative teaching strategies and global learning initiatives. And we have the great honor of having her today with us during ELT Week to talk about promoting inclusion through sustainable development goals in our classrooms. So welcome, Marcela.
Hello, everyone. What a pleasure to be here with you all again. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And here we are again in this ELT Week 2025. Okay, last year it was a pleasure for me to present at ELT Week 2024. Here we are again with you all, 2025. I imagine that you are all relaxed. You are all suntanned, okay, after this summer holidays. We are finishing, right, and going back to school, going back to the classrooms soon. So it's wonderful that we have this ELT Week 2025 now at this moment, so that you can go to the classrooms with lots of fresh ideas. And here is my presentation. Yes, bridging gaps, promoting inclusion through the SDGs in our classrooms. Well, as it has just been said, my name is Marcela Villan. This is me. I'm a global educator and I'm a teacher of English here in Argentina. And I've been in a classroom for how long? Let's see if you can guess. Write it in the chat box. Let's see. How long? 36 years. So everything that I am going to tell you works because I've already had it in my classrooms. Well, this is my LinkedIn banner, and as you can see, it's full of different icons, logos that belong to different organizations I'm connected with. As I have just said, I'm a global educator, especially connected with global schools programs from the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network and the Institute for Humane Education in Maine, the USA. Where are you joining from? I'm located in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Capital Federal. Where are you joining from? I imagine that most of you are connecting from some place of my wonderful country, my beautiful Argentina, but maybe from other parts of the world as well. So where are you connecting from? Where are you joining from? Write it in the chat box. Let's see. Beautiful places, I imagine, right? So that we can start getting to know where we are all watching from. Our agenda today, well, we are going to be dealing with inclusion, what inclusion really is about. We are going to be talking about the SDGs, of course. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't. Don't worry, because I will be telling you all about them. We are going to see the connection between inclusion and the SDGs. We are going to see how to promote inclusion in the classrooms through the SDGs. And of course, there will be some reflections at the end. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat box. I will be answering you at the same moment, or maybe I will be answering them at the end, but please write them in the chat box so that we can keep connected. So let's start. Inclusion, a word that is very much talked about these days, right, in our country, here in Argentina and everywhere in the world. Inclusion. I imagine that when I mention the word inclusion, there are other words that come to your mind. For example, autistic spectrum disorder, ASD. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Dyslexia. Dyspraxia. Tourette syndrome. Neurodivergency. SEN students, students with special needs, students with impairments that require some additional support. And I am sure that as a teacher, you have found most or some of these cases in your classrooms. So what is inclusion? Inclusion is defined by UNESCO as a process that helps to overcome barriers limiting the presence, the participation, and the achievement of learners. That is to say, overcoming these barriers that these students have. In this sense, there is a big difference between inclusion and integration. Integration is when learners labeled as having special educational needs are placed in mainstream education settings with some adaptations and resources, but on a condition that they can fit in with pre-existing structures, with pre-existing attitudes and an unaltered environment. So let's say that in a way, when we talk about inclusion, we're adapting the school to the learner. Whereas when we talk about integration, we are adapting the learner to the school. You see the difference? When we talk about inclusion or integration, we are talking about inclusive education. When we talk about inclusion, in fact, we are talking about inclusive education, a process of strengthening the capacity of the educational system to reach out to all learners. That is to say, we want to reach a more equitable and complete approach with all the students, regardless of their needs. They want to feel valued, respected, and supported to reach their full potential. And I imagine that that is one of the great things that we need to do in our classrooms. If you have a look at these two pictures, we can clearly see the difference between integration and inclusion. You see that in the integration picture, right, there are people included in the same structure, but not completely being part of it. Whereas if we have a look at the inclusion one, you see all the people together in the same structure, right, but with no separation at all. So the central message here is really simple. Every learner matters, and it matters equally. As I always say, we have to remember that we don't just teach English, we teach human beings. And that's very important because these human beings have needs that we have to cater for. So inclusive curricula are based on the view that learning occurs when students are actively involved, taking the lead in making sense of their experiences. We sometimes know, and we really know, that this sometimes does not occur in our classrooms, okay? These students with special need must be catered for, and that is what we as teachers should take into consideration, must take into consideration. We also know that there are certain strengths and challenges with these students with special needs, right? We know that some of them have difficulty with sustained attention. We also know that some of them have difficulties with organization and time management. We also know that some of them have difficulties with self-regulation, and others have difficulties with comprehension. But we also know that they have lots of strengths. For example, they are very good problem solvers. They have strong creative thinking skills. They focus on their specific interests. And others are talented in fields like the arts, technology, and others. So what we have to do is to take all these strengths, right, to, let's say, our advantage. We have to make the most out of them. We also know that we live in a world that is full of challenges. I mean, we have challenges in our classrooms, of course, but there are also challenges that our world faces. Our world is full of injustices. Our world is full of poverty, environmental issues, wars, political concern, inequality. And we know that we have to prepare our students so that when they come out of the classrooms, they can go and face these challenges. They can go and fight for these challenges. They can go and help these challenges to be solved. For that, we have a perfect framework to take to our lessons. The Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are 17 goals adopted by the United Nations in the year 2015. An urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. As you know, these Sustainable Development Goals encompass the most important challenges that our world is facing. Do you know them? Tell me in the chat box if you do. If not, don't worry, because I will be telling you all about them. These Sustainable Development Goals are the core part of what is called the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. This Agenda 2030 that is a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. The idea is that these 17 goals that were adopted in the year 2015 have to be reached by the year 2030. Unfortunately, we are in the year 2025 already, and we have not advanced much. We are not making much progress. So now this agenda has been extended a little bit more, right? But this is for political reasons, or let's say this belongs to the government. But for us teachers, this is a perfect framework to include in our lessons. And I will tell you why. If you have a look at the different challenges that our world is facing, we have now, number one, poverty, right? The idea is to reach by the year 2030, no poverty, or zero hunger, or good health and well-being for all, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energies, decent work and economic growth. Industries, innovation, and infrastructure have to be improved, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production of all our things by the year 2030, climate action, you know that is a very serious issue, life below water, Life on land has to be taken care of. Peace, justice, strong institutions, right? And of course, as I said, a global partnership to reach these goals. But there is one goal in particular which I haven't mentioned. Let's see if you have paid attention. Which one is it? Sustainable Development Goal number 4. Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education, is the one that we have to pay attention to. These sustainable development goals are recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with the strategies that improve health and education, that reduce inequality, and that spur economic growth, all while at the same time tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. But if we pay attention to Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education, Sustainable Development Goal number 4 is about ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. Wow. Think about the word we started the webinar with, right? Inclusion. And now here you find ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. There is a connection there. Also, these goals have different targets that have to be achieved, okay? If we go to Sustainable Development Goal in its target 4.7, we can read this. Sustainable Development Goal 4.7, also known as Mission 4.7, says that by the year 2030, we have to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. Wow, it sounds wonderful. Yeah, lots of things. I wonder how many of these topics you include in your lessons. Do you work with the SDGs? Do you include these topics in your lessons? Let's see. I hope that most of you say, yes, right, well, amazing. If you don't, let's start now. That's why it's amazing that this ELT week is happening now, so that you can start the year with all these fresh ideas, right? Because if we are saying that by the year 2030, we need to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, who is going to take all these to the lessons? Who is going to teach them how to deal with, let's say, sustainable development? Who is going to provide the knowledge? Who is going to try to promote the skills needed to reach sustainable development? If it is not you, the teacher, who is going to do it? That's why we teachers have a very important role to play with these students that we have in our classrooms, with all the students that we have in our classrooms, yeah? Because we need all these students to become agents of change, right? So that we can have a better future for all. And there is one central promise in this 2030 agenda, the idea that no one has to be left behind. And when we say that no one has to be left behind, the United Nations refers to the fact that we have to reach the most vulnerable, the most marginalized groups. But the idea of leaving no one behind not only entails reaching the poorest of the poor, but requires combating discrimination and rising inequalities, and find their root causes. So inclusion here once again, right? We have to leave no one behind. And if we talk about Sustainable Development Goal number 4, quality education, we have to leave no one behind in our classrooms as well. That's why the word inclusion is absolutely important. Leave no one behind. There are several ways in which you can deal with the SDGs in the classroom. And if you were in my webinar, in my presentation last year in the ELT Week 2024, you must have heard about all of them, about some of them. But one is very important, and it is project-based learning. PBL, very important when we work with students with special needs, and you will see why in a minute. Project-based learning, it's an educational approach where the students actively explore real-world problems, putting them at the center of their own learning journey. Instead of passively receiving information, students gain deep content knowledge and essential skills by investigating and responding to complex questions, problems, or challenges over an extended period of time. In PBL, learning is active. Students don't just memorize facts, they construct their knowledge by engaging in meaningful activities. They investigate a central issue, they apply research, they think critically, and they solve problems to create a final product or presentation. So, following the different steps that PBL has, okay, right, what you are going to do is to create change makers. Why? Have a look at the characteristics of PBL, right? When you use PBL in your lessons, right, you challenge problems, right? You inquire, you make students inquire, right, sustainably. You work with authentic problems, with authentic issues. You give students voice and choice, very important in today's world. You make your students reflect and you provide real feedback. There is a public product that they are going to produce, right? Maybe after the investigation they follow, or maybe a solution to the problems that they have found, right? And their PBL is easily adaptable. That is to say, you can use it. There are teachers that use PBL for the whole lesson, or you can use PBL, let's say, for a certain topic, right? It depends on you, right? But the idea is, or what your curricula, right, demands. But I mean, what PBL is an excellent way to include these students with special needs into working with real problems, working to, let's say, find information and to find the solution to real problems. If you have a look at the picture we have on the left, we have different steps that have to be followed through the PBL, through PBL work. Okay, and for example, there is a driving questions that students have to investigate, right? Then, of course, they are going to prepare after all the investigation they are going to do, and let's say working at a global level, or finding information at a national level, or finding information at a local level. They are going to think about the courses of action that can be followed, okay, for example, to solve that problem, and present all this information to an audience, right? Maybe their friends, maybe a wider audience, as it says here. But a very important point when you work with PBL is that you, as a teacher, can assign roles. When you work with PBL, you are going to make your students work in groups, right? Small groups of 5 students, right, will do, right? Yeah. You assign a driving question, right? That, for example, if you're working with animals, or if you're working with, let's say, food, right? How healthy is food for you, right? Or in connection with animal, working with animals in extinction, right? Okay, there is always a driving question that you have to prepare to guide their work. But at the same time, you can also assign roles. And when we work with students with special needs, these are some of the roles that they can take according to their strengths. Remember that some minutes ago, we mentioned that there are certain challenges when working with these students, but at the same time, right, there are certain strengths that they have. So let's take advantage of them. right? Students with special needs can be project managers of the project-based learning you are going to be working with. For example, they can oversee the progress of the project. They can set deadlines. They can ensure that the other members of the group stay on track. And they can resolve conflicts, right? Or see the conflicts that appear, right, among the other members of the group. Yeah, this is great, okay, because they can do it, right? Maybe there is a list, right, and they just have to tick right on this. It's an easy thing for them to follow. Maybe they can also be the timekeepers. They can monitor the team's adherence to schedules and ensure that the tasks are completed on time. Why not? Again, you produce a sort of guideline for them, right? And they can go ticking, right? Okay, has this student completed this? Oh, yes. Has this student prepared that? Oh, yes. Okay, easy job for them to do. Yes. They can also be facilitators, that they can lead the discussions of the group. They can ensure that everyone's voice is heard, and they can keep the team focused during the meetings. While they are in the classroom and they are working in the classroom with information that they have found, that they have prepared, right? Maybe they can be the ones that lead, right, the conversation, say, well, now it's your turn, now it's your other turn, right? They will really love it because they are part of the group as well. They can be designers. Remember that we said that some of these students have very important talents, right? They are talented, for example, in the arts. So they can create visuals, right? Or layouts or graphics, such as posters, infographics, or slide decks to be used in the presentation. Some of them are very good with technology. So why not become multimedia specialists, right? And they can produce the videos, the animations, or other multimedia elements for the project. They can also be documenters, that is to say, they can capture the project's progress through photos, through videos, or journals that then they can use in the presentation. So here, you will be giving them a real role to play, and they will feel really grateful for it. I'm not an expert on the issue. I'm not a specialist on the issue of students with special needs, but I've been the head of the English department of 2 different schools in my area. I've worked on this for more than 15 years, right? I'm still in the classrooms, and I've seen this work. I see that this is really useful to include these students into the lessons. And at the same time, you will be connecting that driving question that you will be presenting at the beginning with the Sustainable Development Goals. So you will be including the Sustainable Development Goals into your lessons. If you are working on animals, of course, you are going to be working on Sustainable Development Goals 14 and 15, life on land, life on water, or life below water. If you are working, for example, with food, you are going to be working on Sustainable Development Goal number 3, right? Health and well-being. Or maybe you will be working on poverty, right? And how to deal with that. So any topic that you can find or that you can think of to be working on project-based learning is easily connected. Any topic is easily connected with the Sustainable Development Goals. So here is a good way to promote these Sustainable Development Goals in your lessons. And here is a good way to promote inclusion in your lessons by promoting these roles. Can you think of other roles? Let's see. If you can, write it in the chat box. I will be reading you and I will be talking to you in a minute. So the idea that PBL is a good way of including these students into, let's say, group work, into and connecting these students with other students in the classroom is amazing, right? And it's something that we can really, let's say, take advantage of, make the most of. In the project-based learning environment, assigning students specific roles helps them take ownership of their work, collaborate effectively, and develop various skills. So it's very important for our students with special needs. By assigning roles, you can enhance accountability, teamwork, and skill development while catering to students' strengths and interests. Okay, and that is what you will be doing here with your students with special needs. At the same time, have a look at that. You will be leaving no one behind. That's great. We are keeping that promise that the United Nations set for the Agenda 2030, right? So inclusive classrooms support diverse learning styles. Inclusive classrooms improve self-esteem and confidence. Inclusive classrooms foster collaboration and empathy. And it promotes, they promote academic success. You can use rubrics to assess the work of these students right at the end of the project. These students will really feel great as they have been incorporated into a group with other members of the classroom. The other members of these classrooms will also gain a lot from these students, right? And they will really feel, let's say, empowered by working with them. So try it. It's really a good approach to take to your lessons, right? You can include both things, the SDGs and students with special needs into your lessons. And it will improve self-esteem and confidence. I really tell you that this happens, right? Because I tried it in my lessons, and when the projects finish, these students with special needs really feel great of having had the possibility of doing something with other members of the classroom, with other students in the classroom, and of having done something, of having collaborated, right, into the project themselves. There is a key takeaway here then, right? Inclusion benefits all students alike, right? All students alike, and that is something great. If we are thinking about school-wide inclusion strategies and not only right inclusion in the classrooms, okay, right? Of course, we need professional development for teachers. We need to teach them how to deal with this, right? There should be clear communication between educators, parents, and students. That's also essential. And you can also arrange some sort of peer support programs or buddy systems. That is to say, connecting students, pairing students, right? Not only in the classroom, but also in the school, right? So that they can all work together. And we can really, these students with special needs feel really included and valued, right, in the whole school. Do you promote an inclusive culture in your classroom, in your schools? Let me know. In your classrooms themselves, let me know. I'm really interested, right? And maybe we can have a talk at the end. So remember, we are all equal in this world, right? We are all equal. Leave no one behind. And remember, let's promote inclusion. Let's teach the Sustainable Development Goals. By promoting inclusion, no one will be left behind. And by teaching the SDGs, you will be creating real agents of change, right? And they will really feel empowered, to be able to work for the world problems. The world needs us, and it needs us now. That's something that I always say, right? And there is another phrase, which in fact is the title of a book, right? The world becomes what you teach, right? Yeah. It's a title of a book that I really love because I work with this material, right? The world becomes what you teach. Remember that. It's very important. The book is by So Weil and the Institute for Human Education. But think about it. The world becomes what you take to your lessons. The world becomes what you teach. So teach the SDGs, right? And promote inclusion. Act now. That's another very important issue by the United Nations. Act now. Don't wait, right? Act now. We need to act now for the Sustainable Development Goals so that the world becomes a better place for all. There is a video there that you will find then at the end, the QR code that I will provide. So don't worry, because I mean, time, we're running out of time. So But yes, I want to go to this part, okay? I went to suno.com. I imagine that maybe you know. Suno.com is an artificial intelligence website that makes songs, create songs for you, right? You just write what you want the song to be about, and it provides the music, the lyrics, and everything, right? So I went to suno.com and I wrote, I have to finish a webinar on inclusion and promoting the SDGs in a lesson, and listen to this.
In the heart of every school we find a world where love and hope combine. Every voice and every mind can flourish if we all align. Together we can rise above, embrace each other, show our love, with open hearts and hands to lend. Inclusion starts where we begin. Let's make a place where dreams can grow, where every child can learn and show. There's strength in all the things they know. The future's bright when kindness flows. Together we can rise above, embrace each other, show our love, with open hearts and hands to lend. Inclusion starts where we begin. It's the small things that we do that make a difference, shining through. In every smile, every cheer, we build a world without a fear. Together we can rise above, embrace each other, show.
Okay, I will be sharing the presentation with you, so you will have it there at hand, but it's really wonderful, right? And it's really wonderful what it says. It's the small things that we do that make a difference shining through. And these students are going to feel really grateful, right? So please include them in your lessons. Use project-based learning, use the SDGs, promote inclusion through the SDGs, right? It's going to be really great to for your students as well, and they will really feel grateful. Yes, I can tell you that. I've also had parents coming to school to tell me how wonderful the students had felt, okay, after finishing this project. So please use them, right? Use all this. Take all this to your lessons. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, ELT Week Argentina 2025. Thank you very much, British Council. Thank you very much. You can find me on 21st, 22s on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn at Marcela Villan. If you have any questions, please write them down in the chat box. We can answer them in a minute, right? And there you have a QR code in which you are going to find the presentation. You are going to find lots of documents to read on the issue. You are going to find the video that is there in the presentation. And well, I hope that it's really useful and that you can start this 2025 with fresh ideas in a new way, and thinking about including the SDGs in your lessons, and thinking about including these students with special needs in your lessons. Thank you very much for being here with me. I cannot hear you, Mariela. You're muted.
every time.
Yeah.
Big thank you. There are lots of thank yous in the chat.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
I think
Thank you very
people are
much.
delighted with the ideas that you've shared. And I could see you trying to tackle some of the questions there during the session. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you very much, people. Love being here. Love being here with you all and all your comments.
So I'm going to start off with some of the questions that were left in the chat for us to continue the conversation. Your discussion was so very much aligned with some of the topics that Jake referenced earlier as well today.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's fantastic to have somebody with your level of experience to bring ideas that we can implement in the classroom. And Diana Veseli mentions, could you share some examples of projects you have carried out with your students?
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you remember someone mentioned there in the chat box that if they could, or they asked if they could use this PBL approach with a stage 1 students? Well, remember that PBL is easily adaptable, as it said there, and you can adapt it to all ages, to all levels, right? It works perfectly well with children from, let's say, 9-10 years old onwards, because I mean, they can investigate on their own and they can do all the research on their own, but maybe you can incorporate it with little kids. And in, for example, in my case, when we deal with these projects with little kids, what we do is to make parents help with the research, right? Yes, and adapt then the investigation to the level of students. Some projects that work perfectly well with this PBL in connection with the SDGs, for example, in connection with SDG 13, which is climate action, and it's one of the most important nowadays. Everyone talks about climate action. Everyone talks about climate change and what we need to do to help this. Is, for example, connected with the carbon footprint. That is to say, the mark that we leave on the environment because of all the bad habits that we have. So maybe they can investigate on what a carbon footprint is and the habits that we need to take to be able to reduce our carbon footprint. And then the final product, the presentation, may be based on the habits that we need to take to reduce our carbon footprint. In connection with Sustainable Development Goal number 12, which is one that I love, which is responsible consumption and production, we can work, they can investigate on the irresponsible consumption and production that we have in this world, yeah, which is a lot, yeah, and well, they can let's say think of ideas, right, to make our consumption more responsible. For example, they can work on different topics inside this big issue of let's say responsible consumption and production, and they can work on fast fashion. Fast fashion is a terrible problem for the world nowadays, right? Because, I mean, it contaminates a lot, right? Okay, there are a lot of, let's say, problems with children labor, right? So they can investigate on that, and then they can show in which way we can change, right, this idea, find a solution to this problem. For example, by thinking about this question of recycling clothes, right? Okay, and this question of circular fashion, on circular economy. You can also work on Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is water, clean water and sanitation, right? And think about ways of not wasting water, right? First, doing all the investigation, right? Doing all the research on how much water we waste, right? And in which ways, which different ways we waste this water. And well, then they can think of habits, right? Okay, that we need to take to be able to reduce this waste in water, which is terrible nowadays, yes, and which leads to a very serious world problem. It's also good to connect these projects with local-based problems, right? Because we always have to remember that these global goals encompass the most important problems that our world is facing. And of course, they refer to a global level, right? But we need to act locally. It's very important to act locally. Yeah, think globally think about all these problems, but act locally. And when we mean to act locally is to think about what is happening around us. Yes, and find a solution to the problems around us. For example, in this case, if you're going to work in the classrooms, to think about what happens at school. Yeah, how much water do we waste here? Right? Or, for example, in connection with food. Yes, okay, how much food do we waste here, right? In the school cafeteria, in the school lunchroom, I don't know. Yeah, but there are about the things, the healthy habits, right, that you keep at school, right? There are certain all these issues can be taken to a local level and they can act locally. And you have to tell them that by acting locally, yeah, they will be helping the world globally. They will be giving a hand to these SDGs, right, to these global problems that that the world is facing.
Thank you, Marce. And one very important comment that Javier Gonzalez posted in the chat, he mentions that also at lower levels, PBL can be easily applied working through inter-areal projects, for instance, with language and arts teachers. And I was just thinking, when you mentioned how much water do we waste, get the math teacher engaged and ask her to deal with the calculations of, if I use this much water when I flush the toilet once, then how much is it? And by getting the other teachers engaged as well, you can perhaps work around the things that are a bit more difficult language-wise. And then in the English lesson, you can focus on simple present routines. I go to the toilet, I flush this and that. And that helps as well.
Yeah, that's why I say that these projects are very adaptable, right? And you can, it's going to be connected with how much you want to do with all these projects, right? Someone mentioned about schools that we have, sometimes we have to be very, we have to keep a certain curriculum. So it's very difficult to, let's say, include these things in the classrooms. And I say that, yeah, we have a curricula to keep. That's true. Okay. And in some cases, some schools are more strict than others. And that's true as well. There are also some heads that are more strict than others in this case. But the one in the classroom is the teacher, right? I always say that. So you can work in the classroom, right? Okay, with all these things. Maybe in a small project, maybe in a big project, right? Maybe taking 2-3 weeks, maybe taking just some days, right? You will decide, okay? Because I mean, it will depend on what your school wants and what your heads decide. I know that. It happens in all schools around the world, not only in Argentina, right? We have this problem everywhere else in the world. But it's always the teacher that can implement the things and that need to, let's say, think about how to include these things, right?
Absolutely. And I was thinking, Alejandra Garre earlier in the chat mentioned during Jake's presentation, actually, that we should focus on what Covey calls our circle of influence. So thank you, Alejandra, for bringing that concept. If you haven't heard of it, what Covey says, imagine a big circle where there is a circle of control, then there is a circle that is a bit bigger, that is a circle of influence, and then there is a circle that is a big circle, that is a circle of concern. So things like ending poverty is in our circle of concern.
Absolutely.
To worry about. We individually are not going to end poverty, but we have to focus on what is in the circle of control. And the classroom, the activities that you do in the classroom are raising awareness is.
Absolutely. Sometimes I also say, Mari, that you don't need to tell your students that you are working on the SDGs, right? I mean, they don't need to know, right? It's important to get to know about this framework because it's a framework that is used globally. So, I mean, it's very important for them because then in the future they will be in the workplace and they will be hearing about all these things, of course. But what is important is to take these issues into the classrooms. Fortunately, most textbooks nowadays include these topics, okay? So it's very easy for you to think about a project, to include in that lesson. But if the textbook you're using does not include these topics, well, try to take them into your lessons yourself, because I mean, they are the issues that your students will need to work on right from here on, right? It's our future. It's everyone's future. Right. So as we said, when we mentioned Sustainable Development Goal number 4, this idea of teaching students about if our students need to know about sustainable development, right, and reaching all these issues, working with all these issues in the future. And it is not the teacher that takes all these things to the classrooms. Who else? Who is going to teach them about sustainable development and about these problems in the world? Well, we need to work on that, right? We need to be aware of our important role, of the role that we have to play. We have, as Jake mentioned before, we are very important in our classrooms, right? We will always be important. We have to keep updated. We have to know that there are certain things that we have to include in our classrooms. Yeah, that's why Jake mentioned this question of being curious, right? Okay, and of being innovative, and that's wonderful. Yet it's also true what Jake mentioned: continuous professional development, right? We need, yes, to work on ourselves as teachers, right? And to be, let's say, curious and get to know what is going on, right? Yes, in connection with education. Sometimes teacher training courses do not teach us, right, about these latest trends or about this question of inclusion. Well, you are a teacher. And as teachers, we are always learners, always, right? I'm 55 years old. Yeah, I'm going to be 55 in a few days. I keep on learning. I keep on doing courses. I keep on listening to podcasts or watching videos or being in this kind of conferences. But that's because I do believe that there is always something new to learn. And it's up to you. It's up to the person, it's up to the teacher, right? Okay. But if you love your students and if you love what you do, the most important thing is to keep updated, for sure.
Absolutely. And something fantastic is bringing also these projects out of your classroom and into that circle of influence. Become ambassadors like Marcela is, talk to other teachers about it, talk to students about it, so that students bring these ideas into their homes and tell off their parents for wasting water.
Absolutely.
And we had fantastic ideas in the chat. Pilar Frias mentioned a project in Ushuaia where they worked on the prohibition of salmon farms relating to the 14th goal. Lorena De Bacua mentioned projects about the environment, pollution, recycling. Lots of people mentioned recycling as well.
Yes, it's one of the most common ones, okay, nowadays. And I'm glad it's like that because it's helping the world a lot. So, I mean, it's glad. Plastic recycling is one of the most common ones, and I really love that. Yes. Also, for example, composting, right, is a great project, yes, to at schools, right, to be able to reduce food waste, and preparing these eco bricks, right, to reduce single-use plastics. That's another great project that you can take to the classrooms, right? Preparing green walls, right? For example, my school is located in a very urban area, right? Okay, so I mean, it's very difficult, for me sometimes to include green, to take them to green areas around. So, well, this year we are going to implement a green wall, right? Okay, which is good for the environment, which is good for the climate, which is good to be working on climate change. Okay, right? So there are very small things that you can take into your classrooms and do a lot, yes, to help the world.
Definitely. And I also wanted to mention another project that was mentioned in the chat having to do with poverty. Melissa Contreras mentioned a project where her students collected clothes for the homeless, and this has to do with community building as well. Ina mentioned the idea of including some of these topics in their Feria de Ciencias, if they have one at school.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, absolutely. If you can do that, that's great. Yes, that's lovely. You have to talk to your heads, and if they don't agree, you have to make them understand about the need to work on these issues and the importance, right, of working with these issues. Absolutely.
Yes, Milagros in the chat is reminding us about the forest fires in our country, which is a very unfortunately, current topic.
Absolutely. Yes, it is. And it is connected also with life on land, of course. Right? That's very important. The question of our forest. So why not start the year, researching on that, yes, and trying to raise awareness on this issue. Absolutely. But let's not forget that the topic here is inclusion, right? And the inclusion of these kids with special needs, into these projects, right? Which is really great and which really helps a lot to all students in the classroom, right? And that's something that you have to consider.
Definitely. And I think one of the key takeaways when you mentioned project-based learning for inclusion is how inclusion ends up helping everybody. And inclusive teaching practices are good, not just for a child who has special educational needs, but that they are generally for the greater good. Speaking of inclusion, I have one other question that came up from Gabriela when you were talking about group work. And sometimes a few teachers agreed in the chat. How do you handle classroom dynamics when, for example, you have one student that the other children don't want to work with? Do you have any techniques for smart pairings or smart groupings so that everybody's included?
Well, first of all, I think that the first thing that we need to do is to remember that there is another issue going around, and that is very important, which is the idea of social emotional learning and social emotional tools that we can take to our classrooms. The first thing that I do as a teacher is to talk to this kid, to see why the problem starts. Why it is that nobody wants to work with him? Why it is? Why is it that no one wants to be working with this kid? Well, sometimes it's because they don't do anything in the project, right? They don't work, right? Or they are just they are filling a space but not doing an activity. This question of assigning roles is essential in this case, right? You will solve the problem by assigning him a role, right? Then if he does not do his part, it will be his problem and not the group's problem, that is essential. Then if it is because there is bad behavior, right, and this kid does not behave correctly, well, there, again, you have to talk to him and talk to him and talk to him. Never get angry, because this question of anger does not help, right? I think we mentioned this in one of the webinars, right? On Monday, I think it was Paola's webinar. We talked about not getting angry, right? And just talking with the students, right? It also depends on the ages, of course, right? But I work with adolescents from 15 to 18 years old, right? And I talk to them, right? And sooner or later, they understand that they need to work, and that they need to be part of the project, and that they need to be part of the work that we are doing in the classroom. But I think that it's like that. You asked me about strategies to sort this out. The ruffling always works, and it is like that, right? And if they say, no, but we want to choose who to work with, well, maybe in the next project you can give that possibility if everything turns out all right with this project, right? And you can, let's say, let them choose in the next possibility. I usually do several of these projects along the year. So, this question of maybe allowing them to choose in some and I choose others, right? That, yes. Let's say, works.
Lorena mentions in the chat, which is also very important, not just talking to students, but also watching and listening to students, and especially when we are teenagers.
That's it. When you're going to talk, the idea is always talking and listening, right? You talk to the students about what he needs to do, or what must be done, or whatever, but at the same time, try to see why. That's why I was saying, try to see why it is that no one wants to work with him. Well, try to get to it's like an iceberg. We just see the tip of the iceberg, right? But we have to go down and see what's inside. What's let's say at the lower level, because there are many reasons why maybe no one wants to work with him.
Yes, and somebody mentioned raising awareness of discrimination as well is key. We can't ignore that. Also, yes, sometimes there are some students that are perhaps that don't get along with the group and so on. But sometimes you do have instances of actual discrimination, bullying, and things which we need to address.
That's another great project we can take to the lessons, right? Working on Sustainable Development Goal 16, which is about peace, right? Okay, and so maybe you can make students do some research on, let's say, the conflicts that we have in the classroom, the conflicts that we have at school, and think about peer mediation strategies, right? That they can take to, let's say, the classroom or to the groups, right?
Thank you so very much. I'm afraid we are running out of time.
Yeah.
So
one last point, Maddie.
Yes,
someone mentioned in the chat box the idea that in most schools nowadays there is integration, but there is no inclusion, right? And I mentioned the same thing. We are in the classrooms. So it depends on us, right? It depends on us, right? Maybe in the school there is integration, but we are in the classroom and we need to include the students.
That's super important. And it's a fantastic segue to talk about the sessions that we are going to have tomorrow. So we are going to continue with the theme of developing 21st century skills and inclusion. Huge thanks, Marcela, for sharing all your knowledge with our participants today. And please stay engaged. Marcela has already shared her social media, so you can keep in touch. And I'm sure you will see Marcela in future events as well very soon. So
thank you. Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Great. And if you can all stick around for a quick second, I know that's all the time we had for today, but I want to thank everybody for participating in day 3 of ELT Week Argentina. I hope everybody is taking notes and ready to apply the SDGs in their upcoming lessons very, very soon. And the different strategies and tools that Marcela and all our speakers so far have shared. Tomorrow we have day 4. It's a big day. We're going to have 2 fantastic speakers. Leandro Palladino is going to join us to talk about embedding digital citizenship into the ELT curriculum, and that's a massive topic for us. We have been talking a lot about AI technology and how to include the ICTs in our classrooms. That's all great, but we also as educators have to do so very responsibly. So one of the main things we need to focus on when we include technology in the classroom is teaching digital citizenship and make sure that our students are using the tools safely, responsibly, ethically. So Leandro Palladino is going to be covering all of that tomorrow at 6. And at 7, we're going to have Maria Eugenia Yaniro, who is also going to be discussing inclusion. Her talk is going to focus on strategies that help dyslexic learners and everyone else. So if you want to learn about how to really include and not just integrate learners with dyslexia in your classrooms, how to adapt materials, how to accommodate students with different special educational needs, then that's the talk for you. So we hope to see everybody tomorrow. My colleague Rob Chatfield is going to be the host, and I will see you in the chats. So have a great night, everyone. Get some rest and do come back for more tomorrow.
Of course. Bye-bye. See you. Thank you. Bye, Mariela. Thank you.